You're still there, Julie. Don't worry.
Okay.
You're okay.
I've gone again.
No, I can still see you. That's okay. Okay. So we've met Edmund. So Edmund is the son of Gloucester, right? So Gloucester is one of the influential, powerful, important servants of the crown of King Lear, and he has two sons, Edgar and Edmund, which is tricky because they both their names start with the same syllable, and I used to get them confused all the time. I don't have a good way other than just having said these things enough to be able to kind of keep track of who's Edgar and who's Edmund, right? But Edmund is the bastard, illegitimate son of Gloucester. Edgar is the legitimate heir of Gloucester, who's going to run into trouble in the middle part of the play and is going to go into disguise and things like this. Okay, so the 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 play opens with a kind of a series of jokes about the fact that Edmund is uh, is not Gloucester's legitimate heir. Like that Gloucester has that he was playing around. He had an affair with someone that he wasn't married to. That she got pregnant and had a son. This son is Edmund, and that Gloucester, acknowledges that Edmund is his son, but that because of the laws of inheritance and titles and things like that, Edmund can never be the Duke of Gloucester. He's just going to be maintained, supported by the Duke of Gloucester. And so there's a couple of really sort of rude jokes about Edmund's background at the very beginning of the play. Act 1, Scene 2 begins with a soliloquy of Edmund. And so, the thing about Edmund is that he's ambitious, right? So he is, by law, by sort of social norm, he is a bastard, therefore he is somehow less than, but he doesn't feel that in himself, right? And so he wants to rebel against that set of norms, conventions, expectations that he is, not up to the task of being the heir of the Duke of Gloucester. And so he has this soliloquy at the beginning of things, which is a really kind of a keynote for what's going on with Edmund and how he's acting, at least in the first half of the play. So I'm going to take a look at this. This is the beginning of Act 1, Scene 2. Thou, nature, art my goddess. To thy law my services are bound. Wherefore should I stand in the plague of custom, and permit the curiosity of nations to deprive me, for that I am some 12 or 14 moonshines lag of a brother? Why bastard? Wherefore base? When my dimensions are as well compact, my mind as generous, and my shape as true as honest madam's issue. Why brand they us with base bastardy, who in the lusty stealth of nature take more composition and fierce quality than doth within a stale, dull-eyed bed go to the creating of a whole tribe of fops got between asleep and awake? Well then, legitimate Edgar, I must have your land. Our father's love is to the bastard Edmund as to the legitimate. Well, my legitimate, if this letter, he's got a prop here, speed my invention and my invention thrive, Edmund the base shall to the legitimate. I grow, I prosper. Now gods, stand up for bastards. Now this soliloquy, it sets up a whole bunch of like really key concepts, philosophical concepts, literary concepts, themes that are in Shakespeare's play. The first of them is nature, right? And nature here gets opposed to custom, right? So custom in line 3 of Act 1, Scene 2, that stands for the idea of conventions, social norms, the rules that a society has put together, including its laws, right? So the laws of inheritance, there's nothing natural about the laws of inheritance in any society, right? Every society comes up with its own rules, its own laws for putting inheritance together. And titles and property and all that kind of stuff. And so there's the legal aspect of it. There's the fact that people look down on him because he is a bastard, because he is not he was uh, his mother was not Gloucester's wife when he was conceived, and so society is going to condemn him, look down on him, insult him, slander him, call him a base bastard, blah 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 blah. And why should he, right? Because when he looks at himself, he says, I feel in myself that strength and vitality, and my I have clear thinking. I have everything that would be important about a person if only I had the tagline of being the son of my father's wife instead of the son of my father's mistress. Um, and so he feels this rivalry with Edgar, right? Who he's gonna call Edgar. He's gonna say that Edgar is somehow, well, he calls him a fop, right? I mean, he calls him somehow weaker, less competent in various kinds of ways. But he has the benefit of legitimacy, and so his actions, that is Edmund's actions in the play, in this tragedy, are partly about trying to show his nature, his character, his makeup as being better than the seal that lays on, the seal of legitimacy that goes with Edgar. Okay, so what we see here in Edmund, and you don't get too far with it in the first act, and you'll see more of it as we get further into the play, right? But he is a very skillful, manipulative, Machiavellian kind of figure, right? He doesn't play by society's rules. He's got this prop, which again, if I was kind of trying to make a list of all the kinds of things that Shakespeare has already used in the stuff that we've read together, this is a lot like the letter that O'Merle has that York demands of him at the end of Richard II, right? So he's got this prop. He's pretending to read this letter, and then he kind of waits for his father to show up so that he can very sort of showily stick it into his the pocket of his shirt or whatever, so that his father can say, well, what's in that letter, and why are you making it? Why are you hiding it so quickly, and all this kind of stuff. And in this letter, which he, and again, thinking about just in terms of things that Shakespeare does a lot of, right? He says the handwriting looks a lot like my brother Edgar's. That sounds a little bit like Maria and Olivia in Twelfth Night. But I've got this letter, and in this letter, someone has said, and then he reads the letter, that the person who's supposed to have written the letter, who's supposed to be Edgar, is writing to Edmund and saying, if our father, the Duke of Gloucester, it's not fair that we, who are in the prime of our lives, are not able to enjoy the property that we're going to inherit while we're young and vital. And if an old man could just sort of hand things off, or maybe be pushed off or killed, then we would have our inheritance, and I would share my inheritance with you if you were into that with me, right? So this is a version of the same problem that Lear and his daughters are facing, right? It's about the person who's got authority, the head of the household, that patriarchal figure, which we talked about this in one of the history plays, I think in the first part of Henry IV, right? The idea of a kind of patriarchal understanding of, what do you call it? When we're talking about the fact that Macbeth doesn't have any children, that one theory of politics, right, is that the monarch is the father of the country because the monarch is like the father of all the fathers and all this kind of stuff, right? And so anyway, that idea of paternalism, patriarchal kinds of stuff as kind of playing its way through this subplot as well as in the main plot, right? What do we do about the inheritance when the father is old and senile, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So Edmund has made up this plot in order to make it look like Edgar is trying to get his hands on his father's property, and Gloucester responds very sort of strongly to this. Act 1, Scene 2, around line 74. Oh, villain, villain, his very opinion in the letter. Abhorred villain, unnatural, detested, brutish villain. These are all things he's saying about Edgar, who, as it turns out, right, is loving and caring about his father, right? But Edmund is trying to poison his father's feelings about his legitimate son. Seek him out, or apprehend this abominable villain. Where is he? And so Edmund says, well, look, I'll maybe Edgar doesn't really mean it, right? And one of the things he wants to do is to try um, to get Gloucester into a position to misunderstand something that Edgar is going to say, so that he can then blame Edgar for it. And that again is a plot device that Shakespeare uses in Hamlet. He uses it in Othello, some other plays that we haven't read together. But and Gloucester says, "Okay, go ahead, you do that, and I'll be there because I want to hear it out of Edgar's own mouth." And then as Gloucester leaves, he's talking in superstitious terms. This is Act 1, Scene 2, around line 102. He says, "These late eclipses in the sun and moon pretend no good to us. Though the wisdom of nature can reason thus and thus, yet nature finds itself scourged by the sequent effects. Love cools, friendship falls off, brothers divide, in cities mutinies, in countries discords, palaces treason, the bond cracks between son and father." And so Gloucester thinks the way that Lear has just reacted to his daughters, and the way that Edgar seems to be reacting to his father, this suggests that nature and the natural order of things is askew. It's kind of off balance. Things are out of whack. And so he's talking in terms of portents and omens and things that are prodigies and that kind of superstitious sort of stuff. And Edmund gets a soliloquy again. This is Act 1, Scene 2 at line 112. This one's in prose, not in verse, but sort of making fun of people who believe in superstitions like this. This is the excellent foppery of the world, that when we are sick in fortune, often the surfeit of our own behavior, we make guilty of our disasters the sun, the moon, and the stars, right? So, he is a skeptic, a realist who doesn't believe in superstition and these other kinds of things, right? He is like all about, what's in front of me, what's natural, that kind of thing, right? But he can use that same kind of language, right? So when Edgar comes on, now he's going to put on the pose of someone who believes in superstitions, right? Edgar arrives at 125 or so, and he says, "Oh, these eclipses do portend these divisions." And now he's basically kind of quoting what his father has just said as a way of making him sound like he is himself a superstitious figure. And Edgar can laugh at that too, right? "Oh, how long have you been a sectary astronomical?" he says at 143. But now Edmund's going to say, "I don't understand. Why is our father so angry at you?" Right? And there's this kind of dramatic irony about this, right? We know why Gloucester has turned on Edgar, but Edmund pretends that he doesn't, and he pretends that he's going to be trying to help Edgar out. And so there's a kind of really great. I mean, I always use the example of Othello and Iago when I'm talking about dramatic irony, but there's a really great example of that dramatic irony here at Act 1, Scene 2 at line 160. Edmund has convinced Edgar that he is on his side, taking his side to try to help reconcile him with their father, and Edmund says, "I do serve you in this business," and that word "serve," right? I mean, it works in so many different ways, right? But Edgar understands it to mean I am doing service for you at this point, right? But a different way of seeing it, and one that we can see in the audience, because we know that Edmund is actually Edgar's enemy. We can see that he is serve you is around the lines. He is like putting you on a plate, right? I'm serving you in that way, or I'm doing something that's going to undermine you. But Edgar doesn't hear that meaning of serve, and so Edmund gets one last little brief soliloquy here. "A credulous father, a brother noble, whose nature is so far from doing harms that he suspects none, on whose foolish honesty my practices ride easy," right? So, I mean, Edmund is all about nature. That is the idea that not putting an interpretation on it, not putting custom on it, not putting convention on it, not putting social norms on it, just the thing, right? Nature. And Edgar's nature is to be naive, gullible, trusting, innocent, and this is the thing that Edmund is going to play on in part as he kind of moves up the social ladder and so on. Now, the rest of Act 1 mostly involves King Lear and kind of giving us a chance to see how Lear is settling into his role as a king without any responsibilities. Oh, sorry, I'm going to take just one quick pause to get this last point in here.